Glad you're here. We were blessed to have the opportunity to travel to Malawi on July 6th through the 21st, and for some of us through the 22nd because we were delayed one day. But it was a great trip, and we just want to share some of that time with you this morning. The travelers, the campaigners, consisted of me, Randy Reagan, who will take the second half of this presentation, and three others from the Southern Hills congregation south of Austin in Buda, Texas. And of course, they're not here today. I'll be delivering the same report to them next week, so I'll be missing next week for that thing. So first question, which is a legitimate question, you may be wondering, why Malawi? Why do we need to send people over there? Because go into all the world begins here. I mean, you don't have to go to a foreign country to make disciples and fulfill the Great Commission, and that's 100% true. And we're addressing local issues here, but why Malawi? Well, those three gentlemen there you see with me are three of the men that we have supported from this congregation for many years, since long before my time. I first began associated with this congregation in 2015. Yeah, 2015, and we were supporting them long before that. There's four of them, and you'll see the fourth one here in just a little bit. That's Jeffrey Chitsukwa right there, 79 years old, and that man does an incredible amount of work, physical work, walking and carrying loads and just doing things, getting to different congregations to preach the gospel. That's Gabriel Betha, Austin Bakiri rather, that's Austin, that's Gabriel right there, and then of course the other Malawian, that's me. Now this is another reason why we wanted to go to Malawi. This particular stop doesn't have any direct connection to this congregation other than the fact that I'm here. This is the M5, if you can read it, it says M5 Deaf Church of Christ, and we planted that congregation in 2016 and went back for a return visit for encouragement and so on in 2017, and you'll hear more about that congregation when we get to that part of the trip. This is a van that this congregation had a large part in purchasing. We contributed some, others contributed some as well. And what they use the van for is transportation for the deaf at a congregation near Salima, Malawi. And you see the deaf girl in the middle wearing the black shirt. She's got this sign that says, "I love you" in sign language. So a lot of the deaf don't want to, and their caretakers don't want them to come to worship because it's dangerous for them to do that, because they have to walk, they can't hear vehicles coming and so on like that. So a lot of times the deaf aren't allowed to come to worship, and so the van helps. This is the Kapezi congregation where the van brings the deaf to, and you see there, that's a pretty typical attendance for them, so that's not a large congregation, but they are doing a good bit of work for the deaf in that area. So where's Malawi? This is Malawi, a little part in red you see there, southwest or southeast central Africa, and there's a couple ways to get there. None of them involve nonstop flights from anywhere except Ethiopia and South Africa. Our particular trip this year went through Ethiopia. So from we flew, Randy and I drove to Memphis. We flew from Memphis to Newark to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia to Malawi. No, Frankfurt. Yeah, Newark to Frankfurt, then Frankfurt to 4 flights altogether. We were in the seat in the plane for almost 24 hours by the time we got there, 2 days after we left. We left on Wednesday and got there Friday. So that's where Malawi is. And this is a little bigger picture of it. This is our schedule. It took us 2 days to get there, like I said. Blantyre is this, I don't have a pointer, but down here near the bottom, That's the second largest city in Malawi, about 800,000 people. Lilongwe is the largest, it's the capital, have about 1 million there. But we flew into Lilongwe, got our rental vehicle, drove down, spent the night in Dedza to break up the drive, because we didn't want to drive for 5 hours after having flown for 2 days to get there. So we spent one night in Dedza, continued the rest of the way the next day. So we were there for 3 days. That's Jeffrey's home location, and so we wanted to spend some time with him and see the work that he does, see some of the congregations that he works with, and so we spent 3 days down there. And then we drove up north to the Mua area, which is right about here, and that's where the deaf church is. There's also a deaf school there that we visited. We didn't do any teaching or anything that day. We just visited and saw the headmaster at Mua/M5. M5 is the name of the highway, but that's the name of the church that is there. And then Salima, which is up here, and that's the one I mentioned that has the van. Lilongwe, and this is their word for Golgotha. That's the name of the congregation that we preached at there. So one day before we left, and then a day to get home. Okay, so we began our work at Blantyre at the Chirimba Church of Christ, but this is another picture of it. It sort of looks like Sammy Davis Jr. Really, there's a good resemblance there, I think. But that's Jeffrey. He came and met us at our hotel and ate with us the night before. So Saturday night he ate with us and told us what the plan was for the next day. And there's the preachers again, like I mentioned. This is the fourth preacher that we support. That is Thelele. What's his first name? Maxon, M-A-C-H-S-O-N. It's pronounced Maxon, Thelele. It's hard to pronounce, but that is it. We began on Sunday at the Chirimba Church of Christ, which had 278 people. And so that's a pretty normal crowd for them. Notice some things here that you're not going to see really again in any of the churches that you see on the screens. There's fans in the back, there's speakers, you may see some fluorescent lighting. Not every congregation has even a normal roof. This has a metal roof at this congregation. Not every congregation has electricity. So this was a rather modern building, and this is the only one of those we saw. So I didn't ask Randy what he thought when he first went into that, but I can imagine going into that and thinking, really, this is Malawi? But we saw more Malawi later on. So 278 people were there. One woman came forward to be baptized at that church. And this is shows us with the kids there. Now this, they were really glad that we were there, but they only expected me. So and I had told them who was coming. So I guess that didn't process in the minds of the people who I told, but they knew 5 people were coming, but somehow they only expected me. And so they said, "Welcome, Brother Bob Matthews." And so anyway, it was a little embarrassing to see only my name there when there were 5 of us, but I understood, and I told them thank you on behalf of the rest of us. Menace Church of Christ was the second one. A smaller crowd, 71. This was after lunch. They had already met for worship that morning, so we didn't expect a full crowd, and there were no baptisms, which was expected. This is one of the men from Southern Hills congregation, Doug Moore. He's deaf, and his wife was one of the campaigners too. Kim Moore is also deaf, so both of them are deaf. And this guy you see translating from English to Chichewa. What you don't see is translation from sign language to English, but we'll see some of that a little bit. Now this day 2 was grueling. This was Monday. It began at 6:30 when we met for breakfast. We left the hotel at 7, but we didn't arrive at our first preaching location until after 10. A couple reasons for that. One reason is because of the distance involved. It was about an hour and a half away, but there was a little incident in one of the villages. There were three vehicles. You saw the van, that was one of the vehicles. There was also two 6-passenger or 5-passenger trucks, four-door trucks. We were in the third vehicle, bringing up the rear. And so in this village, the first two vehicles had passed this motorcycle who was going kind of slowly. As I came around to pass him, he turned into me. And I saw him turning toward me, and so I whipped the vehicle over to the right, and I knew I was going to leave the asphalt and get on the dirt, which was fine. And he hit. And so I pulled the truck to a stop and got out and made sure he was okay, and the motorcycle was laying on the ground. The driver and his passenger were getting up, and they looked a little dazed, but they looked okay. And I asked them if they were okay, and they weren't talking, but then a little crowd started forming, and we get off the road, and finally one guy was telling me, yeah, he said they're okay, and somebody else started the motorcycle was okay, and then more crowd was there. There's probably about 30, 40 people by this point, and then one guy came up who identified himself as a policeman, which was good, and before that, they had already said, yeah, we need to get them to the hospital. And I said, let's go. You should tell me where it is. Let's get in the truck and we'll go. And for some reason, there was a delay. They didn't just hop right on that invitation to go to the hospital. And then by the time the policeman got there and took my story, took their story, the stories jived. And he says, they're refusing treatment. They don't want to go to the hospital. And so he says, wait here just a minute. So he left with them, came back about 10 minutes later, and he says, they still refuse treatment, and since they don't want to go to the hospital, there's no case, you need to leave now. And so I took that as his telling me, don't stay around with this crowd here, go. And so we did. So anyway, that was a little bit of excitement. And by the time we got to Howe, H-A-U, Church of Christ, we were a little bit late. They had been waiting for us, which made us feel bad because they'd been waiting out there for easily 2 hours and probably longer than that. This is Howe Church of Christ. By the time we got there, you see this one does look a little bit different than the first one. There's almost no roof. I mean, that roof provides a little bit of shade, like half shade. It's like these things you put on your patio that have the wood slats, but nothing on top of that. They really don't do much. That's what their roof was like. No electricity, and you see not even a wall back there, and some of these walls on the side aren't complete. So that is in really bad shape, but that's where they worship, and they have a good crowd. You see, there's a good crowd that day, and there were 167 actually. This is where Gabriel Betha, one of the 4 that we support, this is where he preaches. 167 in attendance. There were 2 baptisms in the river. This is Gabriel performing one of the baptisms. And you see, that's not really a river. It's just kind of like a puddle. But there was enough water there to dunk her under completely. So that's all we needed. There were some people who contributed money for Bibles. This is where 1 case of Bibles went to this congregation. A case of Bibles was running 300,000 kwacha, which sounds like a lot, but that's $300, basically $300, a little bit, like $301 for 24, I think, 24 Bibles. So 1 case went there. Next stop was Namiwawa Church of Christ. Now their building looks pretty good, but what they told us after we preached there, before we left, he said, we need food. We're going hungry because of the weather. Number one, we didn't have enough money to buy fertilizer, and fertilizer is expensive. I know that. So he said we couldn't buy fertilizer, and our crop wasn't as good this year as it normally is, and so we're going hungry. and so we need food. And he said we also need Bibles. And so another case of Bibles went there. Jeffrey took the Bibles to those two congregations already, but they're in need. This was Neno, N-E-N-O, Church of Christ, and you see it's dark. Sunset was around 5:30, and so for it to get fully dark, maybe an hour after that, so we're talking 6:30 at night already, and we started at 6:30 in the morning, remember, and so here we are 6:30 at night. Those people, most of them have been waiting there since mid-morning, and they're still there. And here's one of them. There were 3 women like this, hunched over, barefoot. I don't know if you can see, but she's not wearing shoes. She's barefoot, walking with a bamboo cane, and they were just glad that we were there. You didn't see any looks on any of their faces that they were angry that we took so long. You know, like, why was there such a delay? No, they were glad we were there, and we didn't even have time to preach to them. I mean, here we come 8,000 miles away to go to this congregation, and we don't even have time to preach to them. So that made us feel really bad. But you know, we gave them some words of encouragement, and we had to leave. So the man with the older woman, though, that is Austin Chetsukwa. He is Jeffrey's son. Later on, you'll see Jeffrey's grandson. This is not the grandson's dad. That's another son. Jeffrey's got 5 kids, I think, something like that. Okay. Day 3. Busy day, but it was a relief compared to the day before. We're all talking amongst ourselves going, you know, surely Jeffrey knew how long of a day we were going to have. And he said later that he didn't even realize. He said, it was my mistake to put so much of this in one day. So, you know, we didn't give him a hard time about it. The first stop was Mfera, M-F-E-R-A, Mfera Church of Christ. It took over an hour to get there, over the mountains, and there was a crowd waiting for us who had been waiting for an hour or so. Let me read the sign to you. You are most welcome, Elder Bob Matthews. Here at Namiwawa Church of Christ. And you see the signs that they're holding. They all say about the same thing too. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And so, again, I told them, thank you on behalf of all 5 of us for the warm welcome. We're glad to be here. And the next congregation we went to had a very similar sign. The only thing that changed was the name of the church. So, anyway. We felt good that there were so many of them out there to greet us. And they didn't greet us at the church building. They greeted us like half a mile down the road, and they were waiting for us. And so they walked back up the road toward the congregation, and we followed them in the vehicle. 161 present, 15 baptisms in the river. Here you see Jeffrey and Gabriel doing 2 of those baptisms. They did 2 at a time, so it didn't take as long as it would have if only one preacher was doing it, but that was interesting. 15 baptisms in the river. Now this is Blessings Chitsukwa. That's Jeffrey's grandson. A couple of the members here are supporting Blessings going through college, and he's a good student, so I wanted you to see who that is. We're at Jeffrey's house right now, where we took that photo, eating lunch that day. Had a late lunch, and then a short 20-minute drive to Soche. No photos of Soche Church of Christ, but that's Jeffrey's home congregation, and we got there so late in the evening that only Randy preached. And there were 58 people present there that day, and we knew it comprised only members, and so we weren't looking for responses. We wanted to encourage them, and I believe we did that. So there we go. This is travel. A couple of our slides mentioned travel. We didn't work every day because we're going like to get here. It was from Blantyre to drive up north, And we didn't want to pack the day so full that we're tired of traveling to the new location, and then also then we have to meet with the people and spend a full day preaching and teaching. So we didn't really take a day off. I'd call it more a day of recuperation, because the work that we're doing on these full days, it takes a lot out of old people like me and Randy. So we needed those travel days. But this is the M5 Deaf Church, and you see a pretty good crowd there. There was 88 present on the first day, and about 100 on the second day. Now, the first day there were 2 baptisms, and Randy and I weren't there that day because we checked 7 bags, and all 7 of ours arrived just fine. Now, between the 3 that came from Austin, they checked 6 bags, and only 2 of those made it. And so we had checked with the baggage people, and they says, yeah, we've got 3 of them here. And so Randy and I decided, well, we all decided it would be best for Randy and I to go and get those bags, because there were things in there that they needed to deliver to the congregations. So we went to the airport and got the bags. 2-hour one way, so 4-hour round trip. We missed the day of work, but it was needed to do that. By the time the trip was over, they still had not received the other 2 bags. We kept calling, checking, nope, no bags, no bags, no bags. Now this is, of course, you know, the non-Malawian there, but the woman next to me, that's Lucy, and the woman to her right is Chrissy. They're sisters. The Southern Hills congregation has supported Chrissy for probably 8 or 9 years by paying her salary. She works at the School for the Deaf, which is across the highway from the Deaf Church, and she teaches sewing and needlework. And it's an interesting arrangement. The Catholic Church has oversight of the infrastructure, all the buildings and grounds and everything, maintenance. That's the responsibility of this order of brothers from the Catholic Church. They don't pay the salaries. The Malawian government pays the salaries, except for the 2 trades teachers. There's also a carpentry teacher. The government doesn't pay their salary. So they were basically working hand to mouth, basically for free sometimes, until Southern Hills took on their salary. And so they've been paying their salary for this time, 7 years, I guess. The shirt I'm wearing today, you see I've got on there, Lucy gave me that fabric in 2016. Sandy made the shirt, so she was glad to see that it went to good use. And the guy to my left is her son. He's also a college student. That's Emmanuel. He's going to college to learn how to teach others to support special needs communities, not cities, but people. There's the church again, the sign, all 5 of us there. Now this woman I haven't mentioned yet, that's Kathy Williams. She's a sign language interpreter, and I've been to Malawi 6 times. She's been with me every time, so all 6 trips. The other personnel changed every year or every time we went, but the 2 of us have been every year, every time. Okay. Next stop was up in Salima, Kapezi Church of Christ in Salima, Malawi. We support the work there. Not only did we provide funds for the van, but we also send an amount every month to go toward the deaf ministry, which has been going to pay for the time of an interpreter to go with the preacher to teach in the homes of deaf prospects, but also to pay for fuel for the van. So that's where that money goes. Now, 3 of us participated there. All 3 of us did. Randy taught Bible class, which you see him there. I was preaching, and then Doug taught a class in the afternoon. You probably can't see what's on the board, but they've got the order of worship there. It's an opening prayer, song leader, and so on. They had the times listed also. For the sermon, they allowed 35 minutes or 30 minutes. For the Bible class, they allowed 45 minutes. For the communion Devo, 20 minutes for that, or maybe it was 25, I don't know, but a lot longer than we typically, but anyway, that's what they do. Now, on this picture, I got one more. No, I thought. I wanted to explain. There we go. On this picture. So Randy's teaching. This guy's Aubrey. He's the preacher there at Capezi. He's translating from English to Chichewa. This guy is translating from Chichewa to Malawian Sign Language. Kathy, she's facing Doug and Kim, who are sitting on the front row. You see Doug's bald head right there. So she's facing them so they can see her sign language. She's hearing it in English and translating for them. So there's a lot going on right there. Now, in the times where Doug is teaching, like this one, she's still up front, and she reads his signs and translates them to English so Randy and I know what's going on. So, interesting. And then whoever the Chichewa interpreter is, hears that English and translates it to Chichewa. So a lot of translation going on. A 20-minute sermon would take like 45 minutes because of all that. Our last stop, day 8. By the way, there were 154 present for worship that day, 10 baptisms, 7 of whom were deaf. And the second day, we were there 2 days. Second day, we had 5 baptisms, and 3 of those 5 were deaf. Our first visit to, my first visit to this church, Golgotha, or in their words, Golgotha Church of Christ, was in 2015, and this is what we saw in 2015. Not much going on there inside that building. We could tell it was big, that's all we could tell. And you see the bricks, they make their own bricks out of mud, no straw like the Israelites had in their brick. But the Israelites, I don't think, had a fire kiln to heat the bricks, and they do that. They heat their bricks, and it's pretty strong. So by the next year, just in 1 year, they had done this, but you see there's still no roof. And so Southern Hills provided around $1 million kwacha to provide just the roofing sheets, the metal sheets, and they provided everything else. And so this is what it looks like today, which is the reason we wanted to go there. Initially, when I planned this trip, the U.S. was still requiring negative COVID tests to re-enter the U.S. from any foreign destination. And then they dropped that requirement, so we had a day free. I had planned on Wednesday, a day we'd get our COVID tests, and then we had that day free, and I contacted them and asked if we could teach there, and they said, yeah, sure, come on. And so Randy taught a Bible class to the men, which was a lesson they needed. It was about being Christian men. You know, how do you do that? And Kathy and Kim taught the women outside, and for a combined group, I preached. So that was the end of our stops, and Randy will take it from here.
Thank you for your patience, and thank you for being here, and for those of you that contributed not only to the invitation, but my opportunity to go there. I tell you thank you. But I want to commend this congregation also for this work. There are a lot of countries with a lot of needs, and I learned many years ago that you just can't do everything. So you pick where you can help, and that's where you focus your work. And I can tell you firsthand that the work that you are doing in Malawi is the Lord's work and is very commendable. And please, please, please continue this work. It's important. I want you to know, I was here in December with y'all. And the person that you see today is not the person that was here in December. I will never be that person again, ever. It is a life-changing experience, and I'm very, very grateful that it was. But I want to tell you about the Church of Christ in Malawi. Their assemblies, and again, I was exposed to this first off. I mean, we got there on Friday, and we had the opportunity to visit with somebody that Bob had long been, Sadat, was that? Sadat? See, I can speak Malawi. I came back bilingual, in case you don't know that. We visited with him Saturday, but Sunday was my first experience. Well, again, in Malawi, everything doesn't run on the clocks that we run on. In Malawi, you get there when you get there. And so we were following somebody to the congregation, and so they were running late, so we were running late. But they had already started services, and you were driving up, and you could hear them singing. I mean, it was that overwhelming. The welcome was tremendous. They are so glad that you're there. But for the first time in my entire life, Sunday morning services were 4.5 hours. That's how long that assembly went. I never looked at my watch once. I never said, I wonder if we're going to get to the restaurant before the Baptists get there. It was never a thought, never a concern. Everything they do is decently and in order. But for me, I felt like that I had gone back in time to the first century church. Because in Acts chapter 2, when we read about literally the birth of the Lord's church, we read that all of those that believed were together, and they had all things in common. They sold their goods and their possessions and divided them among all as anyone that had need. And so continuing daily with one accord in the temple, breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And of course, the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. Now that was my impression, looking at those brethren at that location, at that worship. When we were in Bible class this morning, somebody was talking about the sheer joy that Christians have. You see it in them. They're not there because mom and daddy made them. They're not there because that's what they've always done. They're not there simply because they're getting their ticket punched. They're there because they love the Lord. They're there because they love worshiping Him. And they are there because they know that they are pleasing to God. Bob did not mention, but at several locations and several assemblies, people literally slept at the church building overnight because for them to get there the next day for the assembly, they couldn't make it. Or it was too late for them to go home. So they stayed there because they didn't want to miss the assembly. It was important for them to assemble together. And you could see it. You could hear it as they sang. Because I can tell you now, I understand 1 Corinthians 14. When it says that you sing with the Spirit and the understanding. I told every one of them, I said, I want to bring you back home to Texas to teach us how to sing. Because you hear it. I did not speak a word of Malawi, Chinga, is that close enough? Again, I'm still learning. I did not know their language, but when they sang, I sang with them. I had no idea what I was singing, but it didn't matter because I knew God did. And I was so glad to be singing with those brothers and those sisters. I've never experienced that in my life. When they pray, they don't pray with cliches. Now again, brother, I'm just telling it kind of the way it is. I'm guilty of it. You know, we get into the cliches that we say. That's not the way they pray. When they pray from the heart. When they pray, you know that it's not something that they memorize or something that they've heard all their lives. So I understand about praying with the Spirit and praying with the understanding, unlike I ever have before. When you see the poverty of these people, when you see how poor they are, and then they take up a collection. In the first place, I don't know where they're getting the money. I really don't. If you look at them, you can't imagine that they've got any. And yet they will one by one come up to the front and they will fill that collection plate. Makes me think of Mark chapter 12 when Jesus commended the widow with her 2 mites. And he said, out of her poverty, she gave all. That was my impression. Out of their poverty, they give all. It is nothing for them to wait. As Bob said, one congregation waited all day into the night because they knew we were coming. We were late most everywhere. I don't think we ever got there when we were supposed to. And sometimes, I don't totally understand it, but they would say, well, they've been here since 8 o'clock this morning, but you knew we weren't going to be here till noon. Yeah, we did. But they're here at 8 o'clock. When is the last time anybody in this country waited 4, 6, 8 hours for an assembly of the Lord's people? Not my lifetime, ever. But that's them, the assembly, and how important it is to them that they can stir one another up to good works and love. And that's what they do, and that's exactly what the Hebrew writer taught us about our assemblies. I continue to be amazed at how many just don't want to assemble. These brethren do. It is important to them, and it is part of their life and part of what they do. They continuously offer the sacrifice of praise to God by the fruit of their lips, constantly giving thanks to His name. And they are eager to do good and to share, knowing that what they sacrifice out of their poverty is well-pleasing to God. Hebrews chapter 13, verses 15 and 16. One other real quick note before I move on, because it came out in the class again this morning. They were talking about people that don't have TVs or radios or all that. Do you know, the whole time I was there, I didn't know what happened in the world at all. I had no idea. And they didn't care either. Their life is so simple. Their life is so filled with hospitality and welcome and gladness and making sure that we were well taken care of. We sat while they sat in dirt, but we had chairs. When they sat on hard concrete, not nice padded pews, hard concrete, we had nice chairs. They always made sure. They humbled you with their generosity. But I want us to, and I want you to know also, how evangelistic they are. They are constantly concerned with converting others. In Acts chapter 5 and verse 42, we read that daily in the temple and in every house, they did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ. As they underwent persecution, this first century church, in Acts chapter 8 and verse 4, as they were scattered by the persecution, they went everywhere preaching and teaching Christ. That is these people. That is what they do. I have never in my life experienced or been associated with so many baptisms. Ever. But let me tell you what these people do when it comes to baptisms. in the first place, when somebody would respond to the invitation, they would sit there and talk with them and tell them what they were getting into in a nice way. The responsibility that they were undertaking. They didn't just come down and say, I want to be baptized. Okay, done, we're out. Oh, no. Oh, no, no, no. And I'll tell you something else. There were people that they turned away, that they determined were not either doing it for the right reason. I don't know it because I didn't speak their language, but they would talk with them and then they would gently take them out and take them away. I will tell you something else that went on when you talk about evangelism. As we were baptizing, I say we, I was sitting there watching, taking pictures. Bob and Doug were actually doing the baptizing. But as this is going on, the church, all the church came out of the building, and there are still people in the crowd there that are not Christians. They are teaching and preaching to them in the crowd while these baptisms are going on, and some went up and obeyed the gospel. Their teaching didn't stop when Bob and I sat down or Doug sat down. The members, these weren't the elders or the preacher. These were the members of the congregation. They were constantly evangelizing. It is important to them that people hear the gospel and that people obey the gospel. And then thirdly, that people in their Christian lives remain faithful. Would it be well if we adopted this evangelistic attitude? Listen to 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Here's what Paul says. He says, I plant, Apollos waters, and God gives the increase. Here's the question, and I'll move on, because I know you've been very patient. But here's the question. If we're planting and we're watering and God gives the increase, if we're not growing, what's not happening? Is it because God just is asleep and is not giving the increase He says He will? Or are we not planting and watering? It's just something to consider. We all want to grow. The Bible tells us how. These brethren understand it and have taught me. What are their needs? Well, again, Bob alluded to that, and I think it is extremely important. But mostly, every time we approach them, we want to hear the gospel. Preach to us. Teach us. I'm reminded of Acts chapter 16. And we're familiar, most of us are familiar with what we call the Macedonian Call, where Paul has a vision and a man is standing there and he says, come and help us. We want to hear the truth. We want the gospel preached. That's what they want. They want people to preach and teach them so they can learn. And the second thing they want, Bibles. Now think about that. I've got multiple Bibles, and recently when I got tired of hauling books around, I gave away a bunch of Bibles. And they would do anything to have Bibles. Why would Christians be in a situation where they can't get Bibles? Well, they're pleading for that. Preach, teach, and give us Bibles. But as Bob mentioned, they have other needs too. The congregation that is struggling, the members are struggling to feed their families because all their crops were destroyed in a flood. That happens. Not to us, because most of us don't grow crops in the first place. And most of us are not dependent upon a harvest, and if that harvest doesn't happen, we have no way to feed our families. But what I noted among the brethren there was their constant willingness to share with what they had. because they're all in the same boat. And they're all suffering the same situation. And so what they do is they take what they have and they share it. I guarantee you they shared it generously with us. We always had plenty of food. They might not. And oh, by the way, we were given a special place to eat our meals. And we always ate first. I think sometimes they understand a level of Christianity that we can only imagine. And now I can say I understand. James wrote this in James chapter 2, starting at verse 15. If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, depart in peace, be warm and filled, but you do not give them the things which are needed for the body, what does it profit? They're not asking for nice, air-conditioned, padded buildings. It'd just be nice if they could meet someplace where the roof didn't leak if they have rain. Maybe just some place to sit other than in the dirt. Maybe something as simple as, because one congregation told us, I wish I'd given you the picture, there was this huge tree falling. It was the most magnificent thing I'd ever seen. I don't know how you could ever cut that thing down, but they did. They were meeting under that tree until they could get this poles set up and this thatched roof. But one of the elders looked at us and said, we're not asking you to give us anything. We're asking you to help us help ourselves. They just need some help. And knowing this, knowing that our brethren, our brothers and sisters in Christ, don't have enough food, don't have a roof, don't have a safe place, and for us to do nothing, brethren, how do we do that? How do we live in what we live in with what we have in this country and not be affected by this? These are brethren. So when Paul said, you do good to all men, he said, you especially do good to those of the household of faith. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10. And you and I, every single one of us, live in a country and have a life, and I'm going to pause just for a second here, because I know this is going on. Our prices have gone up for everybody. Those of us on fixed income, I'm on a fixed income. Those of us on a fixed income, we're worried about inflation, we're worried about interest, we're worried about this, we're worried about that, and they're legitimate. I'm not bemoaning anybody. Younger couples, maybe with kids struggling, make more. I get all that, but we have no idea how wealthy we are and how much we have. And what I implore every single person to do, look at yourself and say, what could I give to help Christians who don't have enough food to feed their families? Individually, what can I do? What difference can I make? Listen to Luke chapter 12 and verse 48. For everyone to whom much is given, from him much will be required. And to whom much has been committed, of him they will ask the more. All of us, every single one of us, are rich. We are. We are. We have been given so much by God. We have been blessed. I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty. I'm just trying to, with words that can't really convey, to have compassion on those who are not blessed like we are. We will all stand before God one day. Every one of us. And when we stand before God, Here's the scenario that Matthew chapter 25 tells us. The king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." And the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And the king will answer and say to them, "Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." Our brethren need us. They need Bibles. They need preachers and teachers. And they need food. And they need a decent place, things that we take for granted. So I leave us this morning with one question. And I'm going to let God ask us this question. Every single person in this assembly. This is God asking us this question. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 17. "Whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? To him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin." James chapter 4, verse 17. You've been very patient and very kind. Bob told me I only had 15 minutes, but it is unscriptural for a preacher to only preach 15 minutes. So you've been very kind with your attention and listening. I hope that what I've shared has some value to you and your Christian life. Maybe your perspective. It's changed mine forever. You know, we have a great privilege. So many blessings. But one of the privileges we have is that we can pray to God. I guarantee you I am praying like I have never prayed. God, make me better. Make me do better. Make me more compassionate. Make me be what you need me to be. And you use me as I can best benefit in your kingdom. We can pray privately, but we also have the privilege to pray together. A song has been selected for those in this assembly who may have a spiritual matter that needs the prayers of their brothers and sisters in Christ. It is a privilege and honor not only for Christians to pray for other Christians, but us to have the opportunity to have those pray for us. But there may be also somebody in this assembly that is not a child of God. If you believe with all of your heart that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, if you're willing to repent of your sins, confess your faith, will immerse you in water for the remission of your sins, God will add you to the church this very day, this very hour. You will become a child of His, and all of the blessings that God can bestow upon His children will be yours. The invitation is yours. If you're subject in any way, won't you come as we stand together and as we sing.